to Masterclass Moments with Dr. Joel B. Kemp. It's an honor to have you join us for the season finale of this season where we've been examining questions of the Bible and race in America. As always, we thank you for taking time to be with us. And as always, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at jel.institute. Go onto our website, jel.institute, to subscribe, get exciting information about what's coming next, to listen to old podcasts, to catch up on some of the conversation, and to give you a sneak preview of what's coming down the road. Now, one of the things that we always want to do before we dive into our conversation for the day is give you a little bit of a Hebrew word, a nugget to carry you through. The nugget for today is actually from the conclusion of the last episode. For those of you who may remember or have seen it, I typically end all of my classes with a benediction from the book of Numbers. That has the "May the Lord bless you and keep you." It's a common one in many churches. And I ended the teaching, and I'll introduce today our Hebrew word is sum. Sum. Sum is the word that often gets translated as to give or to place or to set. So often in that kind of famous priestly benediction in number 6, it ends in "May the Lord grant you peace." But part of what sum means is not just grant, but to appoint or to set. And so I often like to translate it not "May the Lord simply give you peace," but "May the Lord appoint for you wholeness." And in this season, as we transition into the summer after just finishing Pentecost, and as we get ready for all of the highs and lows that the summer presents, and then the tumult of the fall election, my prayer for all of the JL families that we receive the wholeness that only the Lord can give. And precious promise of Pentecost is that that promise of wholeness is sealed with the Holy Spirit. And so we pray that this time will be a place where you will find that peace, that rest, that wholeness that God has appointed to you. So as we continue our journey on this, the season finale, bring back a woman who needs no introduction because she's been with us from the very beginning, the one and only Reverend Dr. Dominique Robinson.
And the crowd goes,
Goes,
wow. No. What up, family? I think I'm gonna call y'all the Just Enough Light family, the JEL family. Then some of y'all are specifically the Masterclass Moments family. Many people prayerfully have tapped into that Hebrew hotline family. I mean, Dr. Kemp is out here, he's like Beyonce and Nicki. Like, he got followers, he got like the Beehive or the
Right.
Barb. So we will call ourselves the Lightites. We need a Hebrew word to call ourselves the followers of the Kemps.
Right. You can always do so if you do light, you can do ordi. So ordi, so like the light or my light.
And y'all, all you gang members who do JEL, y'all know, pick it up. And I wouldn't say Crip Walk, I would say Jesus Walk, maybe.
Right.
In light of the fact that we just came off the hills of Pentecost, and there have been a lot of footwork videos out there. So Dr. Kemp, I mean, it's the finale. So let's start with just a kind of, I guess, a brief kind of update. We are at the end of an academic year. This is the end of your full year's research leave.
Exactly.
Was it called sabbatical or research leave?
It's research leave,
which is different.
Exactly.
This is different because research leaves means people are expecting you to come back with product.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, sabbatical, they say they're okay with you resting, but research leave is we do expect a product. And you return back in August.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So my sabbatical or research leave officially ends in August.
In August.
Dive back into the full academic swing for the 24-25 year.
Any I guess we could say in this quarter, right? Because it would kind of be like, a June, not the quarter per year, but a summer quarter for those academics who we think in semester month. Any kind of like last, and the word last sounds so heavy, but any kind of last self-care practices, events, trips, or whatever that you kind of like want to make sure you do, or bucket list items you want to make sure you do, you and Dr. J, you are Dr. J, you and Dr. G, before August kicks back in. And you probably will start mentally getting back there July, trying to get your syllabi and stuff together. But anything that you're like, all right, in the next 30 to 90 days, I want to make sure I do the following.
Yeah, I mean, probably the two biggest things are, number one, not try to run through the last couple months.
Okay.
For me, there's always this tendency after fight against, okay, now that something is coming, that I don't start, paying interest on a bill that's not due yet. So
Mighty
trying to
God.
take the time to enjoy the next 3 months for what they are.
Yeah.
We'll probably try to do one more beach trip.
Okay.
We
What's
did
a
the one.
preferred beach for you living in Georgia? Preferred beach.
So the one that we've probably enjoyed the most is in Myrtle Beach. So it's about a 4.5 hour drive,
All
or
right.
5.5 hour drive.
Okay.
So
All
we've
right.
done that. Again, it's
Oh,
nice because
Myrtle Beach. All right. Well, if it's 45 out, you're not driving to Florida. Well, who wants to go to Florida? But anyway, who's not driving to Florida? It's
right.
somewhat, what is that? Destin? Yeah, Destin
Yeah. So
or
yeah,
Jacksonville-ish.
exactly. Yeah, there are a couple of beaches in the Panhandle that people have recommended, so we might try to do that because that's about the same distance as going kind of southwest rather than
Yeah.
northeast.
So
So
I don't think it's a good drive, but at least from Georgia. But I think it's called Clearwater
oh
near
yeah, yeah,
Pittsburgh. I really have enjoyed that area. And I know for those who are watching who are millennials or younger, you're like, Dominique, you are literally naming a retirement area. Yes, I am. I am not the millennial who wants Miami. I do not want
right,
the parties I really do want easy living, and I really love the canals that they have there.
right,
Where like you could be in an Airbnb and still get a water vibe or view and not have to be dealing with all of the um tourist kind of energy. All
exactly.
right.
Yeah, my
And
wife and I always joke that we're getting ready for retirement now because we often joke about like the places we like to go and when we like to go. It's usually before they get too crowded.
oh my gosh.
So South
Yes.
Beach is great from 5 to 7 p.m.
Oh my gosh. And right at 6:45 is enough.
Right, exactly.
Actually. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. And then what practices will you be making sure or that you desire to make sure you carry back into, you know, full-time job work? I mean, you've been working full-time, but you've had a blessed, I don't even want to call it a privilege, it is a right to
Mhm.
rest and to emphasize rest in the season with research leave. But what kind of practices you want to make sure you want to take back into getting back into the groove? Because even the word grind is hard, right? So
Right.
what practices you want to take back into getting back into that groove?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I want to do is kind of be insistent on Sabbath.
Okay.
And so
Daily, weekly.
yes, so one of the things that I have as a goal is essentially 1 hour every day, 1 day every week, 1 week every month,
Oh,
where I unplug.
wow.
Now I've been able to do that fairly consistently during kind of research leave.
Okay.
So I want to try to keep that pattern going because it's easy, once start teaching again, which I love being in the classroom, obviously doing a podcast, doing research leave tells you that I enjoy teaching. But then also kind of the daily emails of committees of those kinds of things that I've had a reprieve from,
Yeah.
they will survive another hour or another night. So it's not like I have to respond at 8 p.m. They can
Right.
wait till the next morning. So to be much more intentional and deliberate about keeping those things kind of in a more proper perspective so it doesn't creep into other time.
Absolutely. And then, lastly on this part, talking to a full-time professor, a doctoral student, what advice would you give me going into sabbatical for the fall semester? Now, I will intend to lean into it during the summer months. So, like, what would be your number one piece of advice to me?
Find something that is mindless, legal, and refreshing. Something that's mindless, legal, and refreshing.
Guys, the legal part is what's going to be my.
Always have to give that legal caveat. The lawyer in me still says, because I think a lot of it is there's always a sense that you have something else you can be doing.
Right.
That so it's easy to fill in the free time with other obligations. And
Yeah.
so for me, it's just nice, joke with a couple of my doctoral students, find your Smurfs. So when I was in the middle of studying for comps, for a half hour every day, I watched an episode of the Smurfs.
Now, did you think the Smurfs were black? Because I did.
you know, I have to be honest. They had to be. They
Like,
had to
this
be.
is good Negro things to me.
Right. Like, because all of us have friend groups where you can say, well, there's kind of the brainy Smurf, there's kind of the handy Smurf. It's just, they kind of fit and
Yeah.
track with each other.
And
Um,
and I do wonder if that's just like you say, our worldview or our hermeneutic, like because of our own
right.
location, we like make whatever we watch. Because I used to think Fraggle Rock was black too.
Okay. Yeah. And the Muppets from was always classic.
Oh, I'm not sure if I made all of the Muppets black,
Okay.
which says a lot more about me, I'm
Right.
sure. Um, and then for my generation, by the time they got to Gullah Gullah Island, I was like, oh, the black
Mhm.
people are on the TV. The black,
Right.
or like Sesame Street, I didn't make everybody black.
True. Yeah.
Like Oscar was black to me.
Right. Because everyone has an uncle like that.
Oscar was black. I said,
Right.
wow. Grosvenor every now and then was black to me.
Right.
Elmo was never black to me until the end when they told me who his like real
Oh
puppet
yeah, the puppet.
master was.
Right.
Initially Elmo, I'm like, Elmo was not black to me. And now they got so the diversity of characters and Muppets and
Right.
puppets out there. But yeah, the Smurfs. So find your Smurfs. All right. Well, I'll find what is it? Mindless, legal, refreshing.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah, I'm looking for coasts, mimosas.
Mhm.
Actually, for those who are really supporting me, Bellinis is really my preference.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, coast is so I could read and write and enjoy. So we'll see. All
Right.
right, Dr. Kemp, you have during your research leave, this has been a part of your research as well as a joy and a challenge. You have taught 6 classes at a church in the city of Atlanta, focusing on the developing research for your next book and praxis for you and your wife's business consulting services and really way of living
Mhm.
as faith leaders, practitioners, educators in higher education, as family friend, brother, sister, spouse, co-conspirators. Literally, you all are the epitome of interdisciplinary at work in life.
I
And not
appreciate
like
that.
the separations between it. It's like it's what's moving and doing and going. So you've done that. You've done 6 serious classes. I want the listeners to know you can go to 2 different YouTube channels to find them, but you will be able to visit Dr. Kemp's website and you will be able to find all 6 of those episodes curated together. But if you're listening now and you're like, I want to just kind of chop on it, you can hop on 2 different. You see my eyes looking because I'm finding it. It's on the Candler Foundry channel. So Candler Foundry, and that's Foundry. But you also need to put Dr. Kemp's name with the search, or you can go to Atlanta Presbyterian. Um, it's called Trinity Atlanta. I'm sorry. So it's called Trinity Atlanta. You can go to their channel, but it's Trinity Presbyterian Church in Atlanta. And you also have to put Dr. Kemp's name in it. If you do either of those searches with Dr. Kemp's name, the 6 episodes will populate. It's not a curated playlist, but you know where it is a curated playlist? On the website, beloved. So please visit the website. Y'all see it is showing up. It's somewhere on the screen, I think.
Exactly. It's JL.Institute. Should be
There
on
we
the
go.
screen for you.
Yeah, so
Absolutely.
please go there and you'll be able to curate it. And I will also say, don't listen to them all back to back. If
No.
you work in a predominantly white institution or space, don't listen to it right before you go have to be with the people. Okay. And while I'm giving you this advice, this is the care I'm offering you. Don't don't go watching movies and documentaries either right before you go being with them. Cause sometimes that stuff, I remember I went to watch the Butler and they had to go to
Oh
work the
yeah,
next
yeah.
day. And I was like, you know what? I learned that lesson quickly. So I knew I'm not gonna watch Black Panther and go to work. I'm not gonna watch Woman King go to work. No, I need a little time, a little breaky break before I go in feeling all warrior like and just razzle dazzle extra work. So Dr. Kemp has done 6 classes where he has taught on Bible, race, relation, interpretation, understanding, and in essence has embodied, because he is a Black man in Black flesh and Black skin. He has embodied the work he was attempting, and I'm saying attempting, not that he wasn't successful, to teach, because the question I want to ask Dr. Kemp is, do you believe you met the goals you set out when you started doing the 6 classes? Did you meet those goals?
Yeah, absolutely. They weren't all kind of done as smoothly as I would have liked, but I think absolutely they were met. So that part of it, I'll do the selfish goals. The selfish goals was a chance for me to kind of work through some of the ideas. And one of the things that we talked about, I think, on our first episode, is that one of the reasons these kinds of lecture series are helpful in your research is that it forces you to think out loud and to put the things you've been looking at in practice. And so you get a chance to really test out your ideas and the thoughts, see where they cohere, where you need more support, where some of the pushback will be. So that was very helpful to do that. It also was good because I got a lot of intense reactions, many of which were captured, others that were not. We'll have an uncut edition at some point to talk about some of the ones that weren't captured.
My God.
But I think one of the things we had talked about, I think 2 episodes ago now, was this idea of the medicine going through the system.
Mm,
And so one of the things that was helpful for me in thinking about of what elements will be triggering to certain audiences.
mm,
Because again, I've lived with this stuff for a while now. So when I think about, quoting this particular pastor or quoting this particular historical resource, I've lived with it so long, it doesn't have the same kind of emotional landing as it does with others.
mhm.
So then when you see that, to go, oh, okay. So then I need to be aware of that when writing or when doing additional lectures on of how to couch in such a way. I often joke with students of always imagine, what if what I'm writing ends up on Tucker Carlson tomorrow? Is there something that I want to do to prevent that or to contextualize it, or do I not care? And I go back and forth in all those levels.
Yeah, there definitely has to be a or not it has to be. It is I am appreciative when there is some pastoral component to the deconstruction
Yeah,
work that is done. Now, granted, there are plenty of scholars out there who do an incredible job of deconstruction without a pastoral component.
yeah,
And they leave work for those who are pastoral to come back and attempt to maybe offer that for reconstruction, if there's even space for that. I feel like you are doing the work of both deconstruction and reconstruction, and then for some, not even a reconstruction, an initial construction.
yeah,
Um, well, yeah, an initial construction for some components and pieces with the pastoral lens. That's the theological language, the pastoral lens. But in a more interdisciplinary world, your wife is coming from, a counselor, educator, mental health,
right,
psychiatry, psychology perspectives, and so not to put churchy or Protestant language on it, but make it pastoral. It is also just care filled, FILL
right,
ED, and careful, FULL, you all. And so doing that work, like you said, the medicine, into the system and feeling that you being medicine and then also needing medicine. So I
right.
know it met some goals. Were there any pieces, because you kind of hinted at this a bit of like maybe some areas you're going to pay attention to as you're writing some work or maybe revisiting it, were there just some were there any kind of big aha moments or blind spots that you didn't anticipate going into doing this, that you bumped into that were like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, probably the biggest sort of shock or thing to take forward for me and how to refine this. There's a scholar that I think I mentioned in one of the lectures, Stephen Haynes, who does this
Mhm.
wonderful thing about honor and shame in Southern
Yeah.
culture. And one of the things that I had not calculated for was the ways in which that framework is operative in 21st century churches on questions of race and religion. And so that a lot of the pushback and challenge, in addition to the standard kind of teaching about Black moments, was also rooted in this idea that the truth that was being spoken threatened honor and was threatening to produce shame. And there's a lot of work that my wife and I have done on kind of the utility of shame coming from a Hebrew Bible and a psychological perspective as a way
Oh,
of shaping positive behaviors. But for various reasons, shame is often weaponized. And so these taking into account the ways in which honor and shame are raw in certain kinds of contexts, like this particular congregation, and
mhm.
therefore how, if I don't change necessarily what I say, but to at least perhaps change how I say it, or at least just be prepared for that pushback. So that's probably the biggest thing that I've taken away from that particular lecture
Now,
series.
now, Dr. Kemp, now I got a Hebrew Bible question in light of what you've shared.
Okay.
Could it be argued? Because now I'm also fact checking myself, y'all, because I've shared this in a Bible study or two, and now I'm wondering. But was shame not one of the first emotions we're introduced to biblically when we're dealing with Adam and Eve? Like, yeah, we got God creating the world and God says
Mhm.
that's good, that's good. And then if anybody wants to be the nerd like me to decide, like, what were the first actions of Adam, the first actions of a human being to be made and then to name and to, all these things. But like one of the first emotions we're ever introduced to is their shame when they recognize they're naked.
Right.
And
Exactly.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah. So I think you can certainly argue that there is certainly shame, embarrassment that prompts their hiding. Um, in terms of where it's actually named as well as shame, again, not everything is not about Ezekiel, but since it's the prophet I study the most, I always kind of think about Ezekiel. And so in the last part of Ezekiel 16, which is what my first book focused on, right, he talks about this idea where God says in the prophet Ezekiel that you will remember your shame, and that will cause you to kind of follow my law more closely. And so there's a sense in which, again, shame is used as a positive motivating force, not as a means of ostracizing, demonizing, etc. And so I think that becomes the real challenge is so often, again, shame is weaponized to make people feel less than, rather than recognizing in the context of the work that we're doing, and particularly in this podcast for this season, is there's a certain amount of shame that the lie of white supremacy ought to produce. And that shame ought to be corrective to say, we don't ever want to live this lie again. And we don't want to perpetuate this lie. So there should be some dishonor that one feels when one understands the truth of these things. And so, how to do that in a way that is productive and not combative, if possible, is kind of one of those things where, again, I think the good version of shame that certain texts allude to is what I really want to kind of foster more as we go through this work.
All right. So we went through 6 classes, a lot of heavy, rich, intertextual, interdisciplinary, intradisciplinary content offered. In our finale, we are first telling people go back and watch the episodes because this is not called the Cliff Notes. But as we're at this finale, I mean, Dr. Kim, you take the people to a conclusion that the way race or blackness as sin and bestiality and less than has been constructed biblically from people has been around, this original sin and curse of Ham. And you, in essence, take us through that journey for 6 sessions in a very simplistic as best as possible, because it was a lot more it's a lot more heady than you offered it, in the class. Thank you for being radically contextual enough to put it in layman woman's terms. But you really took us through for 6 sessions in a group of people who some don't even want to behave as if race exists or as if race is a factor that is considered for some of our behavior, or colorism and all the isms connected to it. But in essence, you dismantle and deconstructed how even those of us who are brown and black have constructed race and understand it in the United States of America with a skewed and or misconstrued biblical interpretation of how we see original sin, Eve, bestiality, Cain, curse of Ham, this mark. What is the mark? Skin, color, less than, all the things. And then you literally end it with, there is no curse of Ham. It is not in the Bible.
Yes.
How dare you? For those of us who are in the field of homiletics, rhetoric, or communication, but specifically for homiletics, we would call this the Lowry loop in the sermon, where you upset the equilibrium. Now, in most cases, while we are telling you for the preacher, you are to help resettle the equilibrium before the end of the sermon. When you don't, you have failed my class. Howsoever, you took us through 6 classes to disrupt our equilibrium. We knew it was coming. There were hints at it each class.
Yeah.
But you get to the end of it and say your entire thought process, acceptance of this theory, this life, this philosophy, these practices ain't even in the Bible. Right. Explain yourself, Dr. How dare you?
Well, the outrage is the point, right? Which is that one of the challenges of any text, but the Bible in particular, is that we often see in it what we want to see or what we need to see for our own ends. And so the curse of Ham is the perfect example of that, right? That it is by far the most quoted justification for enslavement of African peoples and then our subsequent subjugation after enslavement ends within the United States, particularly at its height in the 19th century. It is, right, it's Instagram, right? It's the Drake beef right now, Kendrick Lamar. It's everywhere.
Wait a minute, guys. I want to stop and say how proud of Dr. Kemp I am right now for being able to reference the Drake and Lamar beef. But you all know he's a music head, and that is one we should not have assumed he did not know. We are proud of you. Y'all clap it up in that chat right now. You put it
Exactly.
in that chat and be like, my guy, my guy. And while you're here, drop in the chat, whose side are you on? Are you Team
Right.
Lamar? Are you Team Drake? Drop it in the chat. And I also should tell us where you're from, because where you're from or where you live might let us know why you're choosing what side.
Right.
Because all
Exactly.
those West Coast people, you might have a bias, but I'm not going to say anything about that. That's none of my business. Dr. Kemp is explaining the outrage. Proceed, Dr. Kemp.
Right. Exactly. We'll see. We also have to do like the time zone. Those of you who are in certain time zones probably figure out where you're coming from. But the whole idea of this thing that was so common doesn't actually exist. And that to me is one of the powers of the tool of reception history when we want to analyze the lie of white supremacy in particular, which is that one of its major pillars that folk would swear up and down are in the Bible, you literally cannot find it. And so that to me is an opportunity for all of us to pause and say, okay, what are the things that we swear are godly because they are biblical that are absent in one and foreign to the other? And so it's an opportunity to have that kind of moment. So I was building that so that you could see the internal logic of it and then recognize it's an internal logic built on an illusion. And that to me is where the work of dismantling is most effective, at least in what I'm trying to do, what my wife, Dr. G, and I partner in doing, is we've built so many systems on a lie, on an empty shell. But we have committed so much to that, it's hard for us to peel back to recognize it's literally nothing. It's literally hevel, right? The Hebrew word for vanity or emptiness. So that's part of what we're trying to do.
Wow. Vanity means emptiness.
Yeah, like emptiness, something that's hard to grasp.
Jesus.
So in
Okay.
class, again, showing my generation, for hevel, I always play the song "Don't Go Chasing Waterfalls," because the idea is that again, it's something you can't grasp and it's impossible to really hold on to. And that's really what hevel means. So we get the vanity is vanity from Ecclesiastes. It's saying this thing is hard to grasp. So it's like chasing a waterfall. So the live white supremacy is chasing a waterfall, but we've
That was
built.
good preaching for somebody on there. Y'all can go ahead and cash app JEL Institute, because he done gave you a whole word and gave you a song. And hello, y'all
Right,
know, don't
exactly.
go chasing waterfalls. We out here.
Right, exactly. Especially as you get into your summer series.
Summer series, y'all out here sizzling and moving with your playlist. Excuse me, that sounds like I'm coming for colleagues I love dearly, but proceed with you all's playlist for your summer sizzling series, and feel welcome to invite me and to come and share. Anyway,
Exactly. Right. You can always do like when you call her, call me to do a consult. We can connect everything to
we can
Destiny's
connect it
Child,
all.
SWV. There are a lot of things we can do.
TLC, all of it. And for most of
Exactly.
y'all out here, if you gonna go into this Drake and Kendrick Lamar battle and beef, I'm coming with the Nicki Minaj, Cardi B,
Mm,
Meg The Stallion beef. I just want you to know I'm
yeah,
coming with the
balance it
womanist
out.
perspectives. I'm out here, okay, because Meg is out here on and do a whole concert with Get It Glow,
Yeah.
Go Meg. Y'all, I'm out here. I'm out here. Sabbatical says go have fun for a little bit before you sit down and write. So, Dr. Kemp, how I don't want to give it away, so I want y'all to go watch. But just know that there was outrage in the room. Just know that there was outrage in the room, captured on the screen and not. There was definitely, I could see from the way you were teaching, some embodiment stuff going on in the room
Yeah.
and some energy. Since you were telling us that you anticipated this outrage, what was it beyond your expectation, or did it hit where you thought it would?
By the end of the 6 weeks, I kind of recalibrated. So
Okay.
the first couple classes, it was higher than I was anticipating.
Oh
And that's
yes.
where like the honor and shame piece that we were talking a little bit earlier and are kind of live right now,
Yeah.
that was the piece that I underestimated. But as I kind of recalibrated with that, then it kind of hit where I was expecting.
Okay.
And also by the end, some of the kind of the most strident objectors had already removed themselves. So
Mighty God.
God answers prayer. No, but part of I think what was going on is that as one of the brothers who's working the maintenance staff came up to me afterward, was like, I don't know why they're mad at you. you ain't giving an opinion. You're just telling them the facts. And I told him, and that's why there's anger, right? That you can't dismiss it as one angry black man's opinion on something. These are literally historical texts. These are biblical texts. These are histories of interpretation that are, I'm just telling you what they said and how then it was impacted and how our society got structured. Right. So it's not like
So,
debating, who's better, Kendrick Lamar or Drake. It's a debate. Here it's just facts.
all right. So you basically told us that the curse of Ham was not literally in the Bible.
Right.
Now I'm saying this word wrong, but how is it Hamitic?
Yeah, exactly. Hamitic Africa.
Tell us, can you tell us what that is briefly?
Yeah, exactly. So it grows out of something that was mentioned in the last two lectures,
Hmm.
but we focused it on really in this last one. The idea is, so after the flood ends, and then it's Noah and his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Then we get this long chapter in Genesis 10, which again, most non-biblical scholars who are sane people skip because it's just a list of names. Um, and list of names excite scholars. So again, I always tell students, pray for us that we find this exciting. But what it ultimately does is it lays out kind of geographical boundaries for the three sons of Noah. And Ham is said to get what we now know as the continent of Africa. And so there's becomes this Hamitic Africa hypothesis or thesis, which suggests that the continent of Africa belongs to Ham. Ham is the father of all black people, just as Africa is the home of all black people. And therefore, all of the negative attributes that get assigned to Ham get assigned to all black people, which means it gets assigned to the entire continent of Africa. So Africa becomes, a debased, a backwards, a deviant, dangerous, savage world to match the alleged savagery, you used the word earlier, bestiality, etc., of its black, aka Hamitic inhabitants. So again, this is part of the kind of live white supremacy that justifies kind of international human trafficking. Is to argue that Hamitic Africa requires, or it is appropriate to do that for such savages, to lead them into the light of the gospel, etc. So that Hamitic Africa piece is part of that. I think one student put it well. You have to dehumanize before you can import, and that I think that's part of what you see happening with this Hamitic Africa idea.
All right, y'all go watch the podcast, do your readings. There's some scriptures that come up with this, and not just scripture. I mean, it's a rolling resource or literature review of all six, sessions. But you get to that last one, and you're like, read this, check that, read this, watch this. So we get to the understanding that this mark becomes a skin and color. But I think it was lesson 3 or 4 where you offer maybe the interpretation of this is about those without the color, and that's where maybe the curse or the lack of privilege exists. Um, we've seen this curse, this language, this philosophy played out in literature, children's literature. I'm thinking about one of Dr. Seuss's books, or
Hmm.
which one is it? Uh, but they have like the mark. It's like
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I know what you're talking about now.
yeah.
Yeah.
We've seen it play out in that. We've seen it play out with the experiment of the little girls on screen choosing,
Right.
the Barbie doll or the little doll. It wasn't a Barbie, the doll with, blue eyes, blonde hair, talking about, we see it showing up in colorism.
Mhm.
Is is there a fix to this?
Yes.
Okay.
And part of, again, this is a deeply confessional moment. The old Milton Brunson song, "As sure as there is God, there is hope." So for me, there's always a fix. Dr. Jamar Tisby, who's done some really kind of interesting and significant work in this area, often talks about all of these things we are talking about were the results of human choices. And so if humans help build it, I would argue we have a responsibility to deconstruct it and reconstruct something that actually God would want. And so for me, part of the hope is this is not inevitable, right? This is not some immutable law of physics that if I hold a pen in my hand and drop it, it'll hit the ground. right? I can't change gravity, but I can change the lie of white supremacy. I can change anti-black racism because it's something that humans built. And so the question is there sufficient will to recognize that and then do what's necessary to change it? And so for me, there's absolutely hope. And to me, some of the reactions that were captured on camera and those that were not are part of that hope, where people were saying things like, wow, that just made sense of my life. Or wow, that now helps me understand why my parents did this or why my daughter did that. I gave a smaller version of this at another context, and I had made the observation that um, America as a multiracial democracy is barely 50 years old. And so that I am the first person in my family born into an America without racialized segregation. And people just kind of froze. Because again, in a congregation, in the context where most people are well over 60, for someone who's under 50, be like, I'm the first to have never known racialized segregation, just landed heavily on them. And I had to literally stop. It was like, as you were saying earlier, feel a lot of embodiment. It was like everyone's shoulders got tense and those who didn't, heads dropped. And we spent time unpacking that. And so to me, the notion that these things are old and obsolete, that's part of the lie, to push it as far away from our current day as possible. And so to me, the fact that people are convicted when they realize how close it is, that literally
Yeah.
someone standing in front of you is the first person to say, I've never had racial segregation. Doesn't mean I haven't experienced racism. So let's not get that delusion. But I've never experienced racism in the systemic way where there's a law on the books that says, because of being black, I can't do this.
Right.
The after effects of that, I clearly experience every day.
So as we're talking about it being so close and people wanting to push it away, I can't help but go ahead and ask you whatever general thoughts you want to give around, here we are, the end of a semester, an academic year. Commencement baccalaureates are happening across the nation, PWIs, HBCUs, meccas of cities, Atlanta.
Right.
The AU Center, that includes Clark, Morehouse, and Spelman. The understanding that there are other HBCU or historical Black institutions there in the city between ITC and Morris Brown. You working at my affinity and bias, one of the greatest, I hate what they call it, the Harvard of the South. It is, at this point, nobody wants to be called Harvard, but Emory University. And then you got Mercer, right, where your wife works. You got UGA, you got Georgia State. We got schools in the metro-ish Atlanta area where this is close to you enough, but also distant enough because you've been able to be on that research leave.
Right.
But we've been seeing demonstrations, protests, civil disobedience, interruptions across the nation. I haven't seen more baccalaureates, but more of a commencements. We saw in the city of Atlanta, one of the blessed things I saw was Bishop Yvette Flunder being a baccalaureate speaker at that lets you know which CTS I'm a part of.
Right, exactly.
Columbia.
Right.
Columbia Theological Seminary, which I worked for 5 years and earned my DMin from. So that was not shade. That was literally, I'm just that
Our
Christian.
context. Right.
Yes. Okay, y'all. There, you say CTS, you got to say the whole name out these days.
Right.
There, she was like I believe the baccalaureate speaker for both Spelman and Columbia Theological Seminary. One of my best friends and one of your students, Reginald Sharp, baccalaureate speaker at Morehouse, which was a personal thing. He was once a Morehouse grad, sitting in that same seat.
Right.
And not to speak about who preached when he was there, he couldn't recall the sermon, what we are now seeing trending of Dr. Daniel Black giving the best commencement speech at Clark Atlanta. But there was a moment and a time that we won't ignore that Joe Biden was invited to be the commencement speaker at Morehouse. Even Reginald Sharp addressed it in his baccalaureate sermon of having been shaped and formed at an institution that teaches you to be prophetic and then a pull to be conveniently silent. People are pushing this race conversation away. Right. It is very up close and personal in all of our faces. We're watching litigation um, with presidential candidates. And I'm saying that because I just can't believe the person is even still a candidate at this point.
Right.
We're seeing the just a character assassination of Fonnie Willis in the process of all that happening. What do you? Because you gave us this hope it can be fixed, and then we see all of that.
Right. Right.
What are your thoughts in that? What's your expressions? What do you have to say about that, Dr. Kim? It's a lot
Yeah.
of hell going on,
Yeah. Absolutely.
and people want to pretend like race doesn't play a role in it, but it's playing a major role in all these things we just kind of mentioned.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think two things come to mind in light of our conversation. One, again, thinking about the historical perspective on race. Um, shared this one night with my family. So, regardless of who wins the presidential election in November, a trend will continue, which is that every single person ever elected to hold the office of President of the United States of America was born before segregation ended in this country. Every single person here was born before segregation ended, which means everyone was steeped in an America literally divided by race and nothing else, where they could have gone and seen colored only signs or their equivalents. And so this long arc of kind of the live white supremacy is still very much alive. And it's not that there's not a magical moment where we can elect someone and it goes away. So I think we have to get rid of, if we have a hope in a single outcome or single event changing at all, then I think that's a false hope. It's going to be a long grind, right? It's a friend of mine calls it a war of erosion. So I think that's part of the message that came to mind to me when I was thinking about some of these events. The second one, there was a meme that got popular. I think it was on Instagram, where um, a number of people kind of were commenting on how violent things turned on campuses when police showed up. And you saw kind of the militarized police force, and that's been a source of a lot of the controversy and a lot of the debates around the country. And the meme just said, "We should have believed Black folk when they told us this." And the idea behind it, and kind of how my wife and I were talking about it and shared with a few other colleagues, is Black folk have for centuries been saying the police are not evil. So we're not here to cast a broad net, but we are saying there's a violent element, a militarization of the police that disproportionately is concentrated on Black and brown bodies. And, I'll say it the Harvard way, then I'll say it the plain way. When one normalizes violence against one group, it is inevitable that all groups will suffer from that same violence, because once it is normalized, there is no reason for objection. The plain way of saying is Malcolm X's favorite phrase of chickens coming home to roost. If you want the Bible way, God will not be mocked. Whatsoever a man soweth, thus shall he also reap, right? The good old King James version of Galatians. And so part of what, to me, where I see kind of a thread of this live white supremacy and the anti-Black racism that it produces is that on so many of these college campuses, the militarized response of the police and the prosecutions that follow fall more heavily on Black and brown bodies than they do on other brothers and sisters who are protesting. That to me is not a function of them committing different crimes. It's the criminalization of the different bodies they inhabit. And to me, that is a direct result of these kinds of conversations we've been having throughout this season on Masterclass Moments. Of again, if the mark of Cain is Black skin and it's a sign of demonicness, of dangerousness, of devilishness, of depravity, then when I see a Black body breaking a law, I'm necessarily going to punish it more intensely. I'm going to presume more things about it. And so to me, I feel like that's one of those threads. Again, it's out there, but doesn't get as much attention as certain other aspects that are going on in this moment. But in thinking about if I were teaching this class today and someone asked me, what would I say? Those are some of the things that had to come to mind about wanting to emphasize how, again, the dangerousness, the depravity, the deviance that gets attached to Blackness in the 1700s shows up, you know, 2024 all across this nation, from my institution to Columbia to UCLA, et cetera.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and it is our task and goal and prayer to continuously hold on to hope. Do you get more annoyed with brown people, black people
Mhm.
who buy into this lie of white supremacy more than white people who do so?
It depends on what day you ask me, honestly. um, so part of what I've been trying to do, and Dr. G has been kind of immensely helpful in kind of framing this, is all of us imbibe the lie of white supremacy every day. It's literally in the air we breathe, the commercials we watch, the music we listen to. It's always around us. And so the question is, how then do we help build people's immune systems while at the same time we try to turn off the faucet that's flooding this? And so at times I get frustrated, but I'm trying to get less frustrated and see where they are, right? In a personal moment, I'll share. A number of years ago, God and I have occasional conversations, and you know, I'm not that person who will hear God tell them what clothes to put on in the morning. Some people have that kind of conversation. That's not often how it is with me and God. But there are moments where I can undeniably say I know God has revealed something to me. And one of the things God revealed to me a while ago was a simple thing: pray until you see someone's pain. And I was like, God, that's not the answer I want because I'm ticked off right now. I don't want just like pray till you see their pain. That's not what I want. Like I want the good old smiting God. Give me that. And part of what that did for me and does for me is it helps lessen some of that frustration. Is that what I'm looking for now is how is that you've imbibed that lie? How have you drank the proverbial Kool-Aid? And are you ready for a detox program? And for me, that willingness to recognize that you have drunk the Kool-Aid and are you ready for a detox program? If so, JEL and TheraFrame, my wife's organization, we have a detox program for you, right? It's not five little mixtures in the cup that you can take, but we do have a detox program for you. And so that's part of what this work does for me is to try to say, okay, if you have bought this lie and expressed in certain ways, are you willing to A, recognize it is a lie, and B, be detoxed? And if so, then you become a soldier in the next phase of this battle.
Now, there's a fine line of you and I serving in predominantly white institutions, in fields of academia and intellectual enterprise that is steeped and or shaped or influenced by the very systems we're trying to overturn,
Right.
um, identify, see. There are places where we placate or play particular roles to navigate and move. Um, what do you do for self when you I know we do real God. I think we do an amazing job of working on not compromising self. We'd
Right.
rather not compromise self. Now there are some times where we know the cost isn't that much to navigate a particular space because we have another outcome.
Right.
What skill sets or factors would you offer our listeners to consider when they're having to negotiate and navigate? Like, what are some questions one should ask themselves, to say I'm making sure I'm practicing that fine line of
Mhm.
of allyship and survival,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
or solidarity and survival.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I like that frame of solidarity and survival. I think for me, there's not a generic do these three steps because it'll vary based upon context a bit and personality. So a couple things that I try to monitor for myself are: number one, there's no such thing as a perfect weapon. There are only adaptive strategies. And what I mean by that distinction between a perfect weapon versus an adaptive strategy is discerning what is your sense of calling. And I'll use, again, very specific theological language here. What is your sense of calling? And then what is necessary for that calling to be fulfilled? So I had a conversation with a colleague recently about, are you called in the academy to be a pastor or a prophet? And pastors and prophets, although they both begin with P's in English, have very different functions. And while a pastor may have prophetic moments and a prophet may have pastoral moments, their jobs are very different. So prophets are called to be kind of bulls in china shops. Their job is just to come in, throw over tables. Their job is to just say, "Thus saith the Lord," deal, don't deal, and go. Pastors have a different kind of nurturing and calling, a different kind of, I need to walk you from ignorance into enlightenment. And so, which one are you? If you're a prophet, then the ways in which you move in spaces are different than if you're a pastor. So that spectrum of survival is going to feel a little different depending on what role you're playing. And so for me, I always try to be clear on which role am I playing, which role do I feel called to in that moment. Then the third thing, and this is again a deeply personal one, and again because a Hebrew Bible scholar, s- use that framework. There's a brother John Collins who used to teach at Yale, who has this book on cult and culture. And one of the things he argues about cult and culture is that what we see in books like Daniel in the Hebrew Bible are ancient kind of Jews negotiating that tension. So the cult are those things that are central to their identity as the people of God. Culture is everything else. He argues, and I think he is right, that what Daniel and other texts from that time period tell us is that on questions of cult, that is, those things that are central to your identity, to your relationship with God, you can never compromise on those. Come hell or high water. If that means you get thrown into a lion's den, if you get thrown into a fiery furnace, you do not compromise that. On questions of culture, you can navigate that culture in such a way where your cult still is held intact. For me, I think that's a useful framework. So when I feel that who I am as a person is being compromised, who my ancestors have made me to be is being compromised, that's where I draw the line, here and no further. And someday we can talk about the various institutions that have invited me to leave in those moments where I have said here or no further. But it comes at a cost. But it's a question again. I felt in those moments the cult, CULT, was being compromised, and it was not just a question of culture. That's sort of a perhaps a long-winded answer to your question, but that's kind of what came to mind.
No, no, that's what it is. So we've talked about some heavy stuff today, all season long,
Yeah,
all season long. We're approaching the summer months where people tend to get a little bit more lighter, more carefree, so to speak. And all we all realized whatever summer bodies we thought we were working on, this summer's about to get the body we're coming into this summer with,
right.
fluffy and all the things. So now I got a lot of well, first I should ask you, is there anything else you want to say about the serious matters before I give you all of the not serious matters that I'm going to ask in my popcorn pop culture
Right.
way of doing things?
The only one thing I was going to add that I think we talked a little about in our last podcast was sort of the how some of these traditions get reversed in kind of Black religious traditions. And so one of the things that's interesting is, and you'll see it a little bit in lecture 5 and lecture 6, I talk about some Black religious traditions which take all of these kind of alleged curses of Blackness and invert them, both to celebrate God's Blackness as well as ways of critiquing American whiteness. So the two things that came to mind were, one, there's a famous story in, was it Second Kings, about Gehazi, the servant of the prophet Elisha, who develops leprosy. And in many, and in this development of leprosy, Elisha says, "And this leprosy will be for you and your descendants forever." And so one of the things that develops in certain Black religious traditions is how that gets associated with whiteness. That is, whiteness itself a curse rather than Blackness. So you see this kind of interesting inversion of the paradigm, which again we can obviously problematize just as we could the other, but it's interesting to see how all of us are kind of trapped in this system and how we end up trying to explain race based upon the Bible. Again, very different locations, very different ideas for very different purposes. For Black folk, and I use this phrase, racialized theodicy, which is how can we explain Black suffering through the lens of race, is very different than trying to explain why I have the right to dominate someone. So those are two very different ideas. And then the second is this idea that if all of Ham's descendants are Black, including the land of Canaan. Well, if you study the genealogy of Jesus Christ, who are his people? And the majority of his people belong to the descendants of Ham and the Canaanites. And so part of what ends up happening then in that context is the question of the blackness of Jesus, right? Not just kind of the ontological blackness that Cone and others talked about, but the literal biological blackness, the racial categorization of Jesus as black, grows out of some of these same traditions. And so even if one wants to argue that these things are reflective of race, what would it say that a God knowing that would put his very embodiment as a son into that black skin? And what does that mean for black religious life for those of us who are Christians? So for me, I often like to, when I teach in black churches, I often end the session talking about, again, the phrase from Joseph, right? What men meant for evil, God meant for good. So
And you're so Baptist, you had to take it to Jesus, huh? You just had. No, I'm kidding.
exactly, everything takes you to the cross, right?
Everything takes you to the house. Man, Dr. Kemp, thank you for giving us, this audience, this community, your attention, your space, and a privilege to kind of sojourn with you during the scholarship development work while you've been on your research leave. I have been learning in a really gracious and loving way. How much scholarship development does not have one way of doing things, and how many of the Black scholars I admire and hope to one day be a colleague with, y'all talk through your scholarship while writing versus just making it a thing about writing,
Right.
which also makes it accessible and practical for the people outside of the ivory tower, which makes you the prophet in the community, right? So not just the person. There is a distinction between the ivory tower scholar who never comes out and the scholar who it's our work is literally based within our community, and we can speak it in the language that our community can receive it and practice it, and then speak it within the ivory tower. And quite frankly, y'all, we keep it up. That tower ain't gonna be ivory but too long. It's it's gonna be an onyx tower, or
Right.
what is another black jewel, or diamond, or but it's gonna be
Right.
one of those towers. It's gonna be brown.
Exactly.
I think onyx is black, right?
Yeah, I don't remember.
All right. Well,
But
here's our pop culture questions.
okay.
Do you have a side with Kendrick and Drake?
So I'm a bigger fan of Kendrick Lamar than I am of Drake.
Okay.
So I will side with Kendrick,
Okay.
not just because some of his influences were some of
He
the people I grew up listening
absolutely, y'all, if you're an ethicist, pardon my language. And if you're Dr. Fry Brown, pardon it even more. These persons are also upset when we use language that are violent based around things like this. But he murdered Drake with that last diss track. It was
Yeah.
like, my God.
Yeah.
All right. So we know Dr. Kemp is leaning on the Lamar side. Drake, get your game up so that the Bible scholar can support you. All right. There's been a video circulating of a pastor in Texas who shushed a member of his congregation who was in the praise and worship team. She was singing. Well, actually, she wasn't singing. She started having I guess we would call it a Baptist fit, but it was on the border of being a Pentecostal praise.
Right.
And he shushed her, and it became national chatter and conversation. Have you ever seen anybody ever be shushed in the church? The pastor, have you ever seen the pastor shush somebody in the church?
I have.
You have.
Yes, I have.
And did the person deserve to be shushed?
In the instance that I'm thinking, I've seen it happen a couple of times.
Okay.
The first two that come to mind, no.
Oh.
The third one was borderline, but the first two, no.
Okay. And were these Baptist churches?
Yes, they were.
Mighty God.
Yeah.
If you were in the pulpit preaching, would you feel empowered to shush anyone?
For me, that would seem, that's inappropriate, because I am not the God of that service or of that church, and I don't think everything has to obey my word. And so there's a difference. Like, to me, I want to be discerning. Are they having a sincere moment with the Holy Spirit, or are they just trying to act up to get like an extra 5 seconds on camera or something like that? But for me, I would much rather, invite the ushers to go and escort the person downstairs for their shout fit. And then if there was a pattern or something, then talk with them afterwards, like, hey, this passage about the spirit being subject to the person, what do you understand that to mean? But
Okay.
no, all the power dynamics and those kinds of things, just They've always rubbed me the wrong way.
Understood. More pop culture questions, y'all. Oh, we gotta ask Dr. Kemp. Are you a Bridgerton fan?
I have not, or I am not. I've heard about it. I have not watched it.
All right. So there's a new season out and everybody's
Yeah.
pressed about watching this and doing this. Um let's see what else is happening in pop culture. Well, there are tons of real things happening, but we're just having fun here.
Well, I mean, the NBA playoffs are obviously.
Oh gosh. While we're here, then we got to talk about Reese and the white savior.
Oh yeah, Caitlin Clark. Yeah.
That's whatever her name is. You all, this is coming from a former basketball player. I used to play basketball at Penn State. I transferred to Georgetown. I stopped playing basketball. So this is the former collegiate athlete who is being very dismissive of that foolishness. Okay. Anyway, also I would like to give big ups to this next generation of Black female basketball players. I could have never played with a lace front, lashes, and nails. Y'all are really teaching us something out here in these
Right.
streets. And I want to thank you for your dedication to your beautification while you out there playing. You are talking to the people in the generation who we thought we were little female Allen Iversons. Okay. We had braids and Dr. Seuss socks. So I want to celebrate y'all for your laces, your lashes, and all that jazz. Oh, let's go to the Olympics. How you feeling about our girl coming back from Sha'Carri Richardson? How you feel about her coming back?
Yeah, excited. Like, to me, one of these things, it's an interesting, we're talking about kind of Black women athletes.
Yeah,
It's
sorry.
it's interesting to see how the Olympics has increasingly started centering Black women in ways that has not been true. Like when I was growing up, like it
Yeah.
was FloJo and that was it.
There's supposed to be a movie coming out about her.
Yeah, I did see
I
that.
think Taraji Henson was no. It was either Taraji or my girl, the comedian. We read Tiffany Haddish.
Oh yeah, Haddish. Yeah.
Supposed to be playing her. But at this point, they need to go ahead and get Sha'Carri
Right.
Richardson to play her. But I hope that does come out. Speaking of films that have come out, did you watch the one what is my girl's name? Shirley Chisholm. Did you see that film?
No, it's in my playlist.
Okay. All right. Did you
Yeah.
see did you see Rustin?
No, I saw the last one I saw was Origins.
Ooh, that was
That's the one,
good.
that was the one that was based on Isabel Wilkerson's
Yes,
past.
yes.
Yes.
That was good. I had to
Yeah.
break that up. I couldn't watch that all in one sitting, and there's so much to be.
Yeah.
That ain't fun for you. That was research. I mean, it's research, but
Right.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
I'd read her book, Cast, and heard her give a
Yeah.
lecture here in Atlanta.
Oh, you got to hear a lecture.
Yeah,
Oh.
which was a great experience. So.
Oh man, that's so cool. All right. Yeah. No.
Yeah. So that's.
Yeah.
That'll be one of the fun things to try to do, is try to catch up on a little bit of the movies.
Right. And for all you comic hero people, DC or Marvel or more original, I won't shade anybody any further. There's a Transformers coming out later this summer that's supposed to give some more backstory. I am appreciating the preacher in me is appreciating the films that are coming out, giving backstories of character development for persons. That one is keeping the legacy and lineage of the films going. But as we talked about early on in this season, the villains and heroes, what makes them a villain and a hero, what storyline or story plot has developed them. I mean, I want to know how Storm hair got gray. I know everybody talks about the weather, but there was something else.
Right.
There's a lot of other struggle and movement going on. I personally now can't even watch X-Men without thinking that it's about racism instead of mutant ability.
Right.
Of course, the churchy person in me has always talked about the mutant ability being spiritual gifts and people wanting to kill you because you're anointed, and that's just, reading. What is that? It's more than anachronistic. I'm definitely reading my entire viewpoint onto I'm making the Smurfs black instead of blue. Okay, guys.
Right.
But
at least you name it, so that way we know.
yeah. So Dr. Kemp, as we head out, anything you want to tell us that we should be doing for fun to pay attention? Oh, y'all, pay attention. There are a lot of concerts out there, free festivals. Tag in, do something. As Dr. Kemp say, find something legal, refreshing, maybe not always mindless, figure it out, but something that makes you smile, bring you joy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's enough elements to give us joy, but we have to kind of be very diligent about searching for them. So just as we wrap up for the season, as always, my sincerest and deepest gratitude to the one and only Dominique Robinson for making time to be part of this season. I'm also extremely moved and thankful for all of you who've joined us, whether you've been with us just for the last couple episodes or been with us from the very beginning. I'm excited for the journey we have been taking and one we will take for many years to come as we really do try to be about God's work. As we kind of wind down, and one of the things I was thinking a lot about during our conversation is this question of hope and what is hope and how do we think about it. And I think I shared in one of our very first episodes. So go back and check out some of our podcasts that are on our website, jl.institute. You can also pick it up anywhere you find your podcast, on Apple, Spotify, etc. I talked about that the idea of hope in Hebrew comes from this idea of waiting. And there's often a sense that hope is misunderstood as being a future oriented rather than the past oriented thing. And so one of the things that for me has been a source of hope has been looking back over what we as a people have already accomplished, what we have already done. Not in this kind of sophomoric or delusional way of, what we did in the past we can do now, but really this deep sense of I can believe there is hope for tomorrow because of the hope and the faithfulness I've seen in the past. And so part of what JL wants to try to do is bridge that gap between past, present, and future to see how the lessons from the past inform our present and give us a direction for the future. So as part of our closing for today, and revisit the word that we began with today of soon, for God to place or to appoint or to give. And so we pray that during the summer, you will receive the gift of rest, the gift of peace, and the hope that comes from knowing, as JL often likes to say, God gives us just enough light for the step we are on. Thank you for this time. Thank you for this time. Thank you for this time. God bless you, and we'll see you in our next season with Just Enough Light in the Masterclass Moments with Dr. Joel B. Kemp. God bless.
The Hebrew Hotline is a dynamic resource that provides insightful and inspirational engagement of biblical Hebrew to Christian leaders, seminarians, and laity. The Hotline will assist you in providing an in-depth exegesis, contemporary hermeneutical transfer, and practical application for your sermons, Bible studies, presentations, and lectures. Visit our website and schedule your Hebrew Hotline session today.